We did it. We are selling ammo. NazoAmmo.com. We teamed up. Keystone Munitions, quality, premium product. We're selling it online. What do? You go to NazoAmmo.com. First thing that pops up, what's this? It's an email list. What's the email list do? It's going to give you access to promo codes. It's going to give you access to events, T-shirts, apparel, everything we're doing. Get on that email list. You want 45? 45's not on the website, but then it's coming in. You're ahead of the curve. You're ahead of the guy who's just finding out about it. You're a part of the family. Very fast and furious how we do everything around here. Nazo Ammo. We are moving Keystone Munitions. Premium products. We're doing it. You want to pick up? You don't want to have it sent? You're Carl. You live down the road? Pick up Nazo at the promo code at the end. Now you're picking up ammo here. We're doing it, man. We are doing it. Nazo Ammo. www.nazoammo.com. Small town, big ammo. 5anddimeeaston.com. They have their website officially up. You can shop most of their stuff online. They also have Fucked. They have Fucked in the store. I think they're the only one allowed to sell Fucked out of their store. It's 484-544-4719. That's at 5anddimeeaston on social media. These guys are great. I mean, they're killing it. It's the best skate shop, in my opinion, in the area. They have a lot of cool stuff there. Both the owners are rad. I stop in when I can. They're open Monday through Friday, 11 to 7, Saturday, 10 to 7, and Sunday, 11 to 5. There is someone always there to help you out with your needs. You can check their inventory off the website. You can check out some videos they got on there, and they're doing some cool things. Their social media is awesome. They support a lot of local skaters in the area, and they're growing. I'm excited to be a part of them growing. I'm excited to help them out. They're helping me out. It's a good relationship, and I push 5 and Dime Easton because they're the best skate shop in the area. Check them out. BTG Blasting. My man, Pat Cunningham, offering you pressure washing, disinfecting, acid washing, and rust removal. It is a high pressure washing business, bringing your stuff back to glory. He does anything from houses all the way to having him come into the studio. He comes down to the studio on a schedule and he disinfects the studio, and we are certifiably clean, and it just covers all the bases. So with the things that are going on now, you're going to need somebody like this. He's got a sticker out front. I am certifiably clean down here. He also offers free estimates on all your needs. He can do corporate and at home. You can reach him at 484-241-1711 and btgblasting@gmail.com. He just started this business and it is taking off. I'm super excited for him, and I'm super excited that he's a sponsor of the show. And you can check out BTG Blasting on social media for all of your pressure washing, disinfecting, acid wash, and rust removal needs. It's high pressure washing, bringing your stuff back to glory. He offers many things, and you need to check him out. Eric K. Dowdle, defense attorney. We had him on the show, and what crazy stories this guy's had. He's helped a ton of people over the years, and if you're looking for help, he is your guy. You can contact them at 610-882-3000, and it's ekdefense.com. Do you have a pending court case? Do you have a court appearance and need a defense lawyer? Do you need proper representation? Felony, misdemeanor, drug offense, assault, homicide, DUI, traffic violation, appeals. Reach out to Eric. Check out the podcast we did with him as well. It has his whole story on there. If you need help, Eric is here to help you. He sponsors the show. We appreciate it. He's going to be doing a monthly thing with us. Eric will be a part of the family now. Thank you for sponsoring. Never Again Radio episode maybe 167. Welcome to Never Again Radio. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. I first saw you, Jason Torres, Mad J's Barbecue. He kept sharing all your stuff, and I'm like, who's this lady? And then I started clicking it and followed it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. She put out a book, and then we started talking. I didn't realize you were from Nazareth.
I am.
And then I just kind of wanted to get into how you even got out of this town and how you got to a point where you put out your own book, which is crazy.
It's crazy. Well, yes, the one and only Jay Torres. Thank goodness for him. I went to Nazareth High School, went to Schaefer Elementary and all those good things. And then I went to Muhlenberg College for college. And then I moved down to the Philadelphia area for grad school. And then my husband and I eventually moved to Washington, D.C. For his job. And we've been there ever since for about 20 years. So that's how I got out of Nazareth.
One of the ones who got out.
Well, but I still visit all the time because my dad's still here. So I come up quite a bit. But yeah, the book came about in terms of, so I travel a lot with my husband, and we went to Egypt about over a decade ago, and we met this great couple from Texas. And the wife and I, we hit it off and we kept in touch. And she reached out to me in the fall of 2019 and said, she knew, so let me backtrack a little bit. I've been writing a travel blog and a food blog for a number of years, and she followed my blog.
Oh, that's fun.
So yeah, and so she reached out to me and said, I'm writing a travel guidebook for Galveston, Texas, and I think that you should write a book for Washington, D.C. And of course, I look at this
That's so
text.
crazy that someone just hits you up and they're like, "Hey, you know what you should do?"
And my husband and I were sitting, we were watching the Eagles, we were watching football, and I turned to my husband and say, Christine wants me to write a book, and I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to write a book. So she put me in touch with her publisher. A couple weeks later, I had a contract, and so I started writing this book. But it kind of fell in my lap. But yeah, it was great, and it took me about almost a year to write it.
How did you get into, I have a couple things I want to pick through there.
Yeah.
How did you guys get into traveling? Was it just two people who met who I was like, I always want to travel, no one wants to travel? And then you guys just start traveling, and then the follow-up would be, how did you get into doing the food and the travel vlogs? Was it just you started documenting it and then it turned into that? Or kind of break down how the travel started?
So I definitely am the person who wanted to travel the most. I think honestly, coming from a small town like Nazareth, my family's from Italy, so we would go to Italy every now and then to visit family and so forth, and I fell in love with Italy. But as I got older, I wanted to explore the world. I don't know, I just wanted to get out and explore the world. So my husband was not a traveler at all, and so we went to Spain 20 years ago, and that was the first time he had ever left the country, and he fell in love.
That's so much fun.
And so little by little, we started to travel more and more, and I just got the travel bug. I just became obsessed, and I still am obsessed. But then years ago, friends of mine were like, you should start writing about all your travels. You go everywhere. You should start blogging about it. So I started blogging about it, and I really enjoyed doing it. I
love how proactive you are, where you just...
People are like, you should do this. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
But a lot of people don't do stuff like that. And when I started doing this and traveling and actually just doing Instagram and stuff, it's I really enjoy documenting the whole process, because there was times when I would go do stuff and I'm like, you don't have anybody to share it with, but having the following that enjoys the travel and seeing what you're doing, it's a pretty cool feeling to be able to share that with people.
Yeah, and I also like to give unsolicited advice, so I like telling people where to go and what to do. So I'm like, I can write this down and people actually listen to it and follow it. So yeah, no.
So did you just start a web page for the vlog?
Yeah, I mean WordPress. It's very, very basic. I mean,
I like that though.
But it's mine and I enjoy it. I have to say, the more that I write though now with the book and so forth, I've kind of gotten away from the blog just because there are only so many hours in a day.
Well, it's growing now into the book.
Yeah. So it's great. And that kind of writing got me very prepared for this kind of writing, because it's similar in terms of writing a travel book. It's very or a guidebook is similar to kind of writing blog entries, because they're very concise, they're very short, and they're kind of very easy to a finite amount of words and so forth.
Have you always enjoyed writing? Was it something that you excelled at in school or anything? You just started doing it. You're like, I forced myself to write. I hate it.
So I love to write now. Growing up, I liked school growing up. I was a good student. All those things. I definitely gravitated more towards math.
Yeah.
And I was a big reader, and I'm still a huge reader. But writing was not my jam. It was not my favorite. But then I became a teacher, and I taught for 17 years in DC public schools, and I started loving to teach writing. So that actually became one of my favorite things to teach.
Oh, okay. That's interesting how that you ended up finding something you loved by teaching it to other people.
Yeah. And I think teaching writing, which sounds kind of crazy to third graders, actually grew my love for writing. And when I started writing the travel blog, I thought, I'm actually not a bad writer. I don't think it was a skill that I knew that I possessed.
Yeah.
I never kind of kept a diary or a journal. I wasn't that person growing up. But once I started writing about travel, and I also liked writing about what I was writing about, right? So I like writing about travel and
food.
We
were talking about that before the show.
Right?
If you start taking a skill and you apply it into something you love, it might be something that you didn't realize that you liked or was good at, but then because it's something that you are passionate about, the passion comes through the work, and then it just kind of links on to what you love about doing it.
That's exactly right. And then so when this book came about DC, I've lived there for almost 20 years. I love the city. I know the city really well. So it was kind of a very, I shouldn't say an easy transition, but it wasn't that hard to get into it because it was something that I was excited and passionate
and you were already
about.
traveling and whatnot, so it was probably easy to, not easy, but like, I guess when you describe easy, what you would say is the format of how you were going to do it probably laid out in your head in a fashion where you were like, oh, I could do this. There's going to be obstacles, but at the same time, this makes sense and there's a lane. And I've been talking to people a lot about lanes lately. And when you get in, like for me with the food, so like I'm in a food lane now and it's going. So it's like I saw that lane, I got in the lane, and now it's moving. And it's like one of the fun things about getting into a lane is like if you can see it, get into it, and you have the courage to tackle it, it's not that hard of a road because you're just kind of moving with momentum and passion.
Exactly. And my husband has he's always kind of like, why not?
Yeah,
that's
always such a huge thing to have where somebody's just like,
right?
Because all it takes is like one friend or a significant other to just be like, why don't you do it?
I mean, what's the worst? And with writing a book too, I said, well, what's the worst that can happen, right? So I produce something. It's either going to be fantastic, it's going to be okay, but I've really nothing to lose, and so it's kind of like, why not, right? So, and I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah,
so glad I did it.
I was excited about the book, and I want to get into it. It was the only thing I did excel at in high school was writing. And I remember at a young age, I don't even know if I've ever told this story on here, I was accepted into the Young Authors Club.
Ooh, fancy.
And, but that was the only thing looking back on school was like, it was me being able to get in, taking creativity, because there is something about writing, because when you start telling a story and you start putting it into words and then you start bringing it all together, you're taking somebody on a journey and they're picturing it in their head because you're reading it. It's not TV. It's not something like this. You're putting it all out.
Yeah.
So like, I believe like that's kind of like where my creative storytelling kind of like started developing. And then I kind of always hung on to that with like writing and getting into books and all that. And it kind of led to a bunch of things. So that's why I was interested to see kind of where that came from with your writing and all that. And for you to be able to take your journeys and you have to, you're walking somebody through history and time and all that. Yeah. What's that been like for a creative release when you finish a chapter or like because, I don't know how your process is, but I'm guessing you take an idea and then you form it and then it gets out there. What's that like for you to be able to do that in a creative fashion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I started writing the book in fall of 2019, the world was normal and everything was open and it was great, and I could get out and go and talk to historians and tour guides, and DC has a million tour guides and a million curators and docents. That was great also to meet with people and research, and I really started really loving the research part of it. I also like to go out and explore. I am that person who wants to take day trips or go to a site or go to an off the beat. I am that person. So this was very easy to do. Like, I'm going to go to a cemetery today and walk around and see some weird crap, right?
And it's fun when that becomes your work.
Right. And
because there's points where you're like, wait a minute. Like there's sometimes where I'll do stuff and then I'm like, man, I got nothing done today. And I'm like, no, man, that was like research and development.
Yeah.
Like, cause sometimes I have to go and like meet up with a bunch of different guests, or I'm trying to find different guests. So I'll locally just go to a bunch of shops, introduce myself, just kind of get a vibe of the store, meet the person. Mm-hmm. And then I'll leave and I'll be like, oh, that was work. Like you got content. It was for your Instagram. You got your booking stuff, networking. But sometimes when you love doing something like that, it doesn't feel like it's. Sometimes I feel bad.
Don't feel bad ever for doing something that you love, right?
Yeah.
But when the pandemic happened in March of 2020, I was about halfway through my book and I couldn't get anywhere, right? Everything was closed.
Yeah.
I mean, the city shut down, the world shut down. And of course, my book got delayed, as did so many other books, because of the pandemic, which was the best thing that ever could have happened, because I don't think I would have even had my book ready in time. But I started to having to go out and go to places that were outside, because that was the only places I could go to. And nobody was answering their phones, right? Because businesses, museums, organizations were closed. They were closed indefinitely. So that gave me therapy during the pandemic, because when everyone was shut in their house, right, it gave me a reason to go out and do things. Like, I would go for a run or for a bike ride and so forth, but I would go to cemeteries, I would go to parks, I would go down to the National Mall and walk around and be able to leave my house. And so honestly, this book was therapeutic, and it really gave me kind of this like, it kind of saved me during the pandemic. It also gave me a purpose. So then in writing, I had a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right? We had more time. I mean, I was growing another business at the same time, but we were home. We weren't going out to dinner. We weren't going to all these different places that we normally do. So I would say, okay, this weekend I'm going to work on 3 chapters. And sometimes I would get 2 done. Sometimes I would get 4 done. It just, I would lock myself in a room with my dog. My husband would have to be in another room. I really had to kind of get into that zone because I get distracted. If the TV's on or music is on or anything like that, I would just,
But nothing feels better when you hit that rhythm and you get like 4 done, or like when you actually get work done and time disappears and you're like, holy crap, I was focused for more than 20 minutes.
And some of these stories that I would write about, like brothels or spies, like they were really fun to explore. So I would research, and I really liked writing about them because they were like scandalous and so forth. And then you find a scandal leads to another scandal. I was like, wait, I didn't know this. And then I would start writing about that. So I loved it. It was such a fun project to write on.
I'm excited just listening to you because now that you're kind of breaking down how this all works and whatnot, and I didn't even think about how you're interested in every story. So each story, you're kind of like living out these historic moments, and it's probably playing in your head, and you're digging into it almost like you're a detective and you're finding all this stuff out. But I mean, how fun is that?
It was, and we were talking about high school. I liked history. I was not a history buff. After writing this book, I learned so much about the Civil War. I learned things that I probably should have learned or paid attention to in high school.
But we also talked about that before. If it's not applying to something that you love, sometimes you're missing out on things that you would have enjoyed.
That's exactly right. So I started becoming more obsessed with the Civil War and just different time periods that I never really cared about. Should we talk about some stories?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to get into because I started perusing through. And, we got on the phone before and we were talking, and there's so much I want to get into because there's way too much, and I do want to have you back on to do more of these. But where did you start in this? Like, what was the first one that kind of was the catalyst to get story to story to story? Like, what was the very first one that you chose to write about?
You're the first person who has asked me that, by the way. I love that question. Okay, so
there's always a start.
There's always a start. When I was connected to my publisher, I initially thought that they have another series called 100 Things to Do Before You Die, in every city. But they already had an author for that. So they're like, no, we need an author for this book, Secret Washington, D.C., because this is one book of many. There's Secret St. Louis and Tampa Bay and New York City and all of those cities. So I sent some entries. They're like, no, that's not weird enough. Like, you need more obscure, off the beaten path.
I love that they push you, though.
Right?
Yeah.
I said, okay. So finally, and the publishing company is a pretty small publishing company. They're based in St. Louis. But because they're smaller, they can get really personal with you and really help you, which is
huge.
Such a blessing. For a first-time author, I could not ask for a better publisher. So the owner and I would be on the phone. I mean, he's this great guy, Josh Stevens, and he would say, okay, you live in D.C. Look up spies. Look up weird laws. And for some reason, the weird laws resonated with me. So I started looking up weird laws in DC. And the first one I wrote, which is what I sent him to kind of secure my book contract, was there's this law at the Jefferson Memorial that dancing in public is actually illegal. And
very footloose.
And people have been arrested dancing there in public. And so they basically, the reason why this law exists, it's a very stupid law that most people don't know about, but it's so people aren't distracted by what the purpose of the memorial is there for. But I didn't find this law to be at any other memorial like Lincoln or Washington. I don't know. So I found this research, I wrote it, and I sent it to my publisher, and literally he was like, finally, this is it. So it's the first entry in my book because that was my very first. That's what kind of got me the deal that I finally,
I like that you put that first, though.
Yeah. So then I met with a guy who I knew who's a historian. He wrote books. He's a really quirky, fun, smart guy. We had coffee, and he gave me all of these ideas. He's like, oh, you need to look into this story about that. Or you need to look, and there's a former brothel. You need to find out about that. And just gave me ideas. He's like, I'm not going to tell you about them. You need to research them. So then I started researching, and that's how I came across a lot of stories. So the one he told me about the brothel is my favorite. So do we talk about brothels?
Yeah.
All right. So the National Mall, of course, is where people go to. It's not just tourists. Locals go there as well. And people, walk their dogs and they run and so forth. The American Indian Museum is probably one of the more iconic museums on the mall, especially just architecturally. It's stunning. But it's built on a former brothel. And so I didn't know that at the time. And a lot of people don't know that. So basically, during the Civil War, there were over 100 brothels in D.C. because war brings in soldiers and generals and a lot of traveling men. And you have a lot of traveling men. Brothels become very, very popular. So there was an area basically between like Capitol Hill and not too far from where the White House is today, where it was called Hooker's Division. And Hooker's Division basically had over 100 brothels. And it's not that big of a space. So they're pretty concentrated.
So many brothels.
So many brothels. They're really concentrated. There are all these bars, all the things that you would associate near brothels. And the site of the American Indian Museum was owned by a woman. Her name was Mary Ann Hall. She was a madam. And she was the most successful brothel owner in the whole city, especially during that time, to be a female and to be so successful.
Yeah.
And really smart. She strategically placed that brothel like right in the middle of Capitol Hill, like kind of in the center where people would go by all the time. And so this was a brothel that was thriving. She took care of her women. She gave them health care. I mean, she literally was a great businesswoman. She was respected. People admired her. She was not looked as this scandalous, sordid woman. She's actually buried at Congressional Cemetery, which in DC, Congressional Cemetery is one of the biggest, most presidents are buried there and heads of state and so forth. And she's one of the individuals buried there. So that was one of my favorite stories. And when they were excavating the land for the museum, they found all of these relics from the brothels. They found champagne corks. They found porcelain plates, really nice things that led you to believe, oh, they lived a nice life. They lived a very extravagant life. People didn't have champagne bottles and corks lying around during that time. So that was kind of cool, finding out places and history about places that I've been to a million times, but the dark,
Yeah, because it's who knew about that, you know what I mean? And then to dig into that, it's got to be so much fun.
So much fun.
To do that. What was the spy one that you were talking about?
Oh, okay. There's a couple.
Because do you like espionage and now? Because it seems like probably you're kind of forming these things that you enjoy and then finding the history of them and then retelling those stories.
Yeah, I have a couple spy stories. I'll tell two.
There's more than one?
There's more than one. It's DC.
That's true too. I keep forgetting.
Did you know if you come to, when the next time you come to DC, you have to go to the Spy Museum because it's it's kind of kiddish and it's quirky, but it's so cool. But you learn there are more spies in Washington than in any other place in the world.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? All right. So the Supreme Court, which is right near the American Indian Museum, used to be a prison. It was when the Capitol was torched in 1812 by the British. You see how historical I'm getting?
Yeah,
My
but how cool is it that you know all this stuff about history?
Now I know these things. So when the Capitol was torched...
You probably have so much fun at dinner parties. You're like, oh, did you know? They're like, who is this lady?
They probably think I'm this
don't tell them what you do.
Right, exactly. Little do they know. So when the Capitol was torched in 1812, they basically had to move to a temporary location. They built this brick structure to be a temporary location. Then it was moved to its permanent location. But then that structure became a boarding house. And the Civil War came on and the boarding house was pretty much abandoned and became dilapidated. So they converted it to a prison because they were capturing Confederate spies and generals and so forth. And so that was a prison. There were these two women there who were both spies. One, her name was Rose O'Neill. She was the most beguiling of the spies. She was imprisoned with her daughter. So they lived in a prison. And she actually lived in the boarding house first. So she was resident turned inmate. But she was so good, even in prison, Jefferson Davis, he ended up giving her spy operations internationally once she was released from prison. So she was a badass spy, not a good person, but a badass spy.
Yeah.
So let's put that out there. Not a good individual.
Really good at her job.
Really, really good at her job. And then there was another spy. Her name was Belle Boyd, who would basically sew. So she would use the oh, I'm a woman and I know how to sew and so forth. There are people who would throw a rubber ball or things into her cell. And she would sew messages in this ball and then she would throw them back out. So that's how she would kind of relay intel and so forth through her prison cell. So I liked, again, not a good person.
Yeah.
But,
really creative.
Really creative and really good at her job. But then if you go to Georgetown, there's this restaurant now called Mr. Smith's. It's like a very popular bar restaurant. It used to be called Chadwick's. In 1985, it was basically a spot of one of the biggest betrayals in U.S. history. So the CIA agent, his name is Aldrich Ames, he was a CIA agent, and he was also very hard on his luck. So he was in financial issues. And he was also obsessed with the Soviet Union. He met with a Soviet at this bar and disclosed the name of over 100 CIA agents who were undercover in the Soviet Union. With that, he got paid out $4.6 million in 1985. So, it's a lot of money now.
Yeah.
But, at the time, he was making like $60K a year. So when you come in that kind of money, but he wasn't very smart. He started buying, he bought a house over $500,000 in cash. He showed up to work in luxury cars. He started wearing tailor-made suits. And you work for the CIA, people are going to notice.
So dumb.
So dumb. And so they found out what he did. He's still in jail without parole. It's one of the biggest betrayals in espionage and in U.S. history. His wife was in jail for over 5 years for aiding and abetting. So those kind of stories I loved because I go to that bar,
Yeah.
I'm did I sit at the same bar where Aldrich Ames, betrayed his country?
Well, that was I'm going to start getting into traveling and I just want to travel more. And it's just, I've been wanting to do it for a very long time. And I feel like, what you said, the bug, we're probably a year away from just doing it as a thing for content and whatnot. But when I started realizing what you had in here, I was like, oh my God, there's so much stuff to go check out in DC because of the book. And then I was like, that made me want to go to DC more because now I'm like, all right, well, there's, 85 different stories, but I'm like, I could grab 3 or 4 of these and just kind of do a loop. But there's I don't know where to start when traveling. And it's I don't know what to look into, but I'm into the weird, different stuff. So this works out perfect for wanting to pick something up and then go check the stuff out and follow along.
When you go, let me know and I'll be your little personal tour guide.
100%.
We'll go visit all these weird.
What's kind of the weirdest thing that you got into? Is there murder and mystery and is there unsolved things that you kind of turned over? What's the weirder and darkest stuff that's in the book?
Yeah, there's some weird dark things. So let's see if I go into some there's a congressman who shot someone. Do you want to hear that story?
Yes.
Okay.
I told you I wanted to do them all and you're like, there's 85. I was like, okay.
I don't know if have time for all of them, but okay, so in the I don't want to get a wrong date. Let's say 18, but mid to late 1800s.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. And we think of Congress now and government, and there's so much scandal and so forth, but there always was scandal. This is nothing new. There was a congressman, his name is Daniel Sickles, and he represented New York. His wife was having an affair with Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star Spangled Banner. She was having an affair with his son, Philip Barton Key. They met at James Buchanan's inaugural ball. So they would have this scandalous, sordid affair. They would meet in cemeteries and have these, rendezvous and so forth. And the husband, the congressman from New York, Daniel Sickles, found out. But he was a womanizer. He did all the things too, times a million. But of course he was pissed. And so he follows them to Lafayette Park, which is the square right across the street from the White House. So it's they have 5 famous statues, Andrew Jackson's in the center and Lafayette and so forth. He follows them this park and he kills Philip Barton Key II, who is Francis.
Did he shoot him?
He shot him. Yeah. So it was kind of like a duel, but I don't think the guy, Philip Barton Key, even had a gun. I don't know.
It's a duel.
It's a duel.
He shoots him.
And he's you dishonored my family, you must die.
Yeah.
And he kills him out in this park, out in the open. And not only does he kill him, but he gets off and he uses the case of temporary insanity. And it's the first time that was ever used successfully in the U.S.
That's so crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Peeling that back and seeing how there's situations and as soon as you said the temporary insanity plea, I'm like, oh, that's something that is used. And then, but for that to be the first scenario of all that stuff going on.
And not only did he get off, He then like had this lucrative career. He served as a congressman for another term.
That's so nuts.
He was like a major general in the war. Like, I mean, like it was kind of like he was like so undeterred. Like, oh yeah, I killed some famous guy. Yeah, well, let's move on. There was another, I could tell you about James Garfield's assassination. Do you know anything President Garfield? Nobody knows about him. Nobody cares because
he probably loved lasagna.
Maybe. He was only president for 4 months, so nobody kind of cares about him. He was president. Well, that's wrong. Yeah. But he was president for 4 months.
He's not known.
He's not as known because he had the shortest presidency, of ever. So he was assassinated on the National Mall, which is where the Gallery of Art is now. So we're like a very famous place now, but it used to be a railroad station. It was like the Potomac Baltimore station. And this guy, Charles Guiteau, was this lawyer, very deranged, very delusional. He would stump and he would like campaign for Garfield. So when Garfield won the presidency, he was kind of like, oh, I'm the reason why you won. And he wasn't. He was just some guy who, out of many people who helped Garfield win. They didn't even know each other. This guy became so obsessed with Garfield that he moved from Chicago to DC and started like stalking Garfield. And basically Garfield and his administration dismissed him, ignored him and so forth. And he thought he deserved like a prominent position in Garfield's administration. He wanted to be stationed in Paris, France. Like he didn't speak French. Like but obviously he became so mad that he was getting ignored and that he was being completely dismissed that he came to the train station when Garfield was there and shot him and killed him. But Garfield didn't even die then. He didn't die till a couple months later because this was before doctors knew to like sterilize instruments and technology, and they kept feeding him really rich meals where his stomach couldn't handle it. He ended up dying also because of infection and so forth. But Guiteau was executed. So
I was going to ask what happened to him.
He actually was, convicted and so forth and was executed. But he was crazy. And so there are these markers now in the National Mall that were just put there a couple of years ago. So not even that long ago. That's when I said nobody cared about Garfield. He was the only president who had been assassinated who had no memorial or markers.
It's crazy because you have people that talk about Kennedy and Lincoln, Reagan.
Constantly.
And then there's never a mention. I've never heard that ever. I mean, that's going through high school. Like I don't remember.
This is why I say that poor President Garfield. Nobody kind of.
How dare they?
If you come to DC, Lincoln is. I could not research this book without stumbling across 3 million stories about Lincoln. Lincoln is the most commonly written about individual, second to Jesus. In the world.
That's nuts.
Isn't that nuts?
What did you do with Lincoln?
So I did a story about where he, there's a restaurant in Chinatown called Walk and Roll.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And they also do karaoke there.
That's even better. I can't wait to do karaoke in DC. That's what I'm saying. Like you could get into this book and find so much fun stuff and then go check it out.
Yeah. This place, this restaurant called Walk and Roll, and it's a very casual Asian. They do like lots of Asian different fusion food, but you can go karaoke there. It used to be a boarding house. And the boarding house was owned by this woman. Her name is Mary Surratt. Her husband had died, and she took over the boarding house. And John Wilkes Booth and other individuals who were plotting Lincoln's assassination would meet there. And she was involved. So she would like give them guns, and she was a really big, important part. And she helped with the plotting of Lincoln's assassination. She actually was executed by hanging eventually because of her like huge involvement. So I talk about that story in my book.
I want to hang there for a second. I've never really dabbled into like the complete assassination, but that's super interesting to get into because you don't think about it because you're like, oh, all right, yeah, he did that. But then it's like, oh, well, there was a whole idea behind it and a plotting.
And a whole team.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, there were all these people. And the fact that she was, again, like at the time, women were not, or at least not as known to be involved in these kind of situations, right? So she was like, again, a really horrible human being, but like badass, but like really bad.
Yeah.
Really bad. And then there's another story about the Lincoln Memorial actually during World War II. The Army had set up like different firing locations, like ammunition to kind of protect the city in case they got attacked. And they set up an anti-craft location on top of the Department of Interior. And a soldier one morning accidentally shot it. and it shot the Lincoln Memorial.
Oh my God.
There's actually still, like, they patched it up, but I guess the patchwork has fallen out and there's no plans of replacement. So there's still like an indentation, like almost the size of a baseball, in the Lincoln Memorial that you really, really have to look for. Like, it's hard to find. But it's like probably the only memorial that was ever fired upon by its own army, by its own. So there's that's
so
in
many
my book.
cool stories.
Yeah. That's a fun book. It was a fun book. I found a lot of fun, cool places to go. And they're not all places that you can actually visit, because some are stories and, history and so forth. But just to go, especially being that I've lived there for so long, and all these places, Mr. Smith's and Walk and Roll, and these places that I've gone to forever, I never knew these stories behind, right? To me, that's really cool.
Did you talk to the owners of the place or anything, or like?
I talked to, this was during the pandemic, so I talked to via email and so forth. Some individuals were much more like interested than others.
Yeah.
But for the most part, yes. Yeah. I talked to people and I said, I'm going to write a book about, I'm writing an entry about your location, and a lot of people would give you information and share photos with you and so forth, which was really helpful. So
was it hard for you, to put a cap on everything? Because I mean, I don't know if this is true, but it would seem to me the hardest part would be the over amount of information and then digging through. Because what was your process to deciding what made the book and what didn't make the book?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's probably enough to do a second book or a third book, but what was your process of eliminating things that you thought didn't fit, or what was the way you made the book be the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is part of a series, as I mentioned. So they do have, because it's a series, there is a certain format that the publisher wants you to follow. So, if you look through the book, every entry is 2 pages.
Yeah, but I like that. And that I just want to interrupt, because there was things I looked at the book where I was like, man, I really like the way it's laid out. It's hard for me to read as far as my attention span, like how you were talking about, it has to be the world aligning for me to just really get into a book and get into it. But when I was looking through this, even now, it's like, oh man, it's like, this is just one page, another page, and then there's pictures. I like the pictures. Then you went to color pictures. And then when I skimmed through it, I was like, man, I'm definitely going to get through the book, because it's an easy pickup.
You're absolutely right. And it also made it a little easier to write, in terms of having a format that was very structured that I had to follow. So no entry could be over 300 words.
But you can even tell how much you develop that, because when you tell the stories, you're leaving out chunks so that people do go read it, and 2, you're just kind of you could tell you're in that mode of how to write it. And that was one thing I just picked up, where I was like, man, she's really got this down, where it's you have your formula, and the hardest part is finding the formula. And I think you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Finding it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I talk a lot and I write a lot. I write very similar to how I talk. And so every single entry I had to shave down. There was not one entry that I did not have enough words. I was like, I can't really go above 300, and I have 386 or whatever. I do a word count on everyone. So I would have to shave off. That was hard to get rid of details that you could still get rid of, but still include the most pertinent details. That was the most challenging.
Do you feel like that honed your craft, and then now you're sharper, cleaner, faster, because you're leaving out things that might have seemed to read in your head as the correct way, but then once you tighten it up, you're like, oh man, I could do this much faster, much more efficient, and I'm getting the point across without kind of leaving it a little bit too fat?
Without question. I think when you write a lot and you're a prolific writer, which is good, a lot of times though, I would be very wordy. My husband would read this, he's like, you have 7 adjectives to describe one thing. You don't need, consolidate, limit it down to 2, right? And so, ooh,
sorry.
No, it's fine. But it did make me a better writer, because it made me be more concise and more deliberate. And those extraneous details that were not that, they were kind of nice to know details, but I didn't necessarily have to have them in the text.
Yeah.
I got rid of them. So it was nice to have that structure. In terms of entries, so when I signed my contract, the entries were 90. I had to create 90 entries. By the time my book was published, they narrowed it down to 84. They had changed the number. So I had to get rid of 6 entries. There were 1 or 2 that I kind of knew, they're good, but they're not as good as the others. And I knew to kind of get rid of them. But then I had about 4 others that I I sent to friends who lived in the city and friends who did not know the city very well, and say, out of these, like, or maybe I sent them 6, but which ones do you like the most? Or which ones do you find are the most interesting? And I use that in the sense of like, okay, locals and tourists, because this book is going to appeal to both, right? And they helped me in terms of like, oh, I like this one because this is more interesting. And that one's like, nobody really cares about that.
I like that you did that. 2 versions of feedback, and it's important to get feedback. And I used to be afraid to get feedback from people because sometimes you might be hearing something you don't want to hear. And then usually when you do, it is something that needs to be changed if you become that emotionally attached to it. So like the moment you said that, that I like that you're not afraid to get opinions and sending it to people who like, because my biggest thing is when somebody tells me they like something I do and they don't know me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's different when you have people being like, oh, man, this is awesome. This is great. Thank you. But you need people in your life that are going to tell you how it is. So, I mean, that must have been huge to be able to just send stuff out and then, kind of let other people pick through it.
Yeah. And I mean, full transparency, I would have my husband. My husband was like, my little editor and would like read through
I like that, though.
It was great. But he's obviously going to be the most honest, right? And so when he said, you don't need 7 adjectives here, or this story is not that interesting, I think you could find, and every now and then I said, I love this story, and then I was like, I'm keeping it. He's like, oh, okay, like you can keep it. I'm just letting you know. Yeah. And then like 3 days later, I'd be like, you're right.
Yeah, like that's.
But you're right.
When you sit with it, when you sit with it, and you kind like, because in the beginning you take it as not offensive, especially, but you're like, no, I do love this. And then you start picking through, all right, well, why wouldn't they like this? And then you start detaching yourself from the project and you're no longer emotionally invested in it. And then when you are able to comb through something like that, it makes the work so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, and I'm noticing as I talk to different people, you have like the stories I've been sharing today are some of my favorite stories from the book, of course. But then I talk to people who have read my book, and other people's favorites blow my mind, in the sense of like my dad's favorite is there's a very small park in the city that has been dedicated to Sonny Bono, Sonny and Cher.
Yeah.
Because this basically when Sonny Bono died, his friend in DC had money and wanted to basically convert this really small kind of like overridden like grassy area in the city that wasn't nice into a small park. It's like 800 square feet. It's not very big, but it's like a memorial to him. And it's very nice now. And there's a little plaque and there's, and so forth. And to me, I liked the story. I thought it was nice. And I think I chose it because it was an area that people walk by all the time. They would never know that it's dedicated to Sonny Bono.
Yeah.
That's my dad's favorite entry in the book. And I'm like, of all the stories, right? I'm like, brothels, spies, assassinations, all the things. And he's like, because he loves Sonny Bono. And Sonny Bono's real name is Salvatore. My dad's name is Salvatore. But like those kind of things that you don't think are going to resonate with people.
And there's always like a small margin of people who like, especially with, you probably have so many different people getting into a book like this because there's so many different reasons why you would.
Yeah.
But then to hear everyone's different stuff, when the stuff that's not super obscure to you that you kind of just put in there for like history and facts and fun is the most obscure fun thing to somebody else. It's got to be wild to hear other people's things.
It's so wild.
What's your husband's favorite one?
He likes the brothel one.
But it's super interesting.
Yes, he likes the spy ones.
Yeah.
He likes. There's like a feel good story. It's not controversial, but it's a really feel good story. So if you go in the mall, there's the carousel, which is very famous. It's the iconic carousel, and that carousel though came from an amusement park outside of Baltimore, so it wasn't always in the mall. And in 1963, when Martin Luther King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech in front of Lincoln, that same amusement park in Baltimore discontinued segregation. And so it was the same day that an African-American child rode on the carousel with 2 white children. So it was like monumental. So when the carousel came over to the mall, though, in the 1980s, people didn't really know that story because, it was a small amusement park. And the carousel is owned by private citizens, which I didn't know. I thought like the Smithsonian or like the National Mall owned it. Later on, they found that story, and now there's a little plaque that commemorates it. But my husband loves that story too because it's so fitting. Like the carousel is right; it's not too far from Lincoln, so like to kind of be right where Martin Luther King delivered that speech. I guess it's just very kind of full circle.
It's so crazy that like that history is attached to it, and then there was nothing talked about it at all.
Isn't that nuts? And it was a big deal, right? So That's probably my husband's favorite. I have to say, I've been talking to a lot of different groups, and I spoke to a Girl Scout troop recently, which was very cute and very adorable. But they range from like 8 years old to 16. So I was like, all right, I chose a lot of stories that had to do with, girl power and the women in my book and so forth. But there's a place in my book called Barbie Pond, which I should talk about. And I thought it's basically this art installation that these like quirky artists have done made out of all Barbie dolls. It's really cool. It's in their front yard and you can walk by, and they do like 4th of July theme, Halloween theme, but they'll do like, election theme, and they'll do DC political stuff too. I was like, oh, these little girls are going to love the Barbie Pond. They could have cared less about the Barbie Pond, because I told them the story. So in DC, there's this famous statue, the Joan of Arc statue. There aren't obviously as many monuments, memorials attributed to women anywhere as they are to men. So the Joan of Arc statue, she's like on the horse and she's holding the sword, and she looks really, really fierce, and it's a really big statue. But the sword over time has been stolen 3 different times over like the last century, basically. And I told this story about how the sword, which is, it's 5 feet tall and it's 30 pounds. It's a big sword, how it keeps getting stolen. Like people don't understand like why and who and so forth. These kids were obsessed with the Joan of Arc statue. So I would try to move on to the carousel story, the Barbie, like the one I'm like, oh, the little girls are going to like this story. But what does this sword look like? Is it metal? Is it steel? Why would they steal it? Do you know if it's still there? Can I go touch this? I mean, they were obsessed. So it's like, you never know. And I could not, I literally had to put on like my little teacher voice. I taught for so many years. I was like, so we're going to move on.
At least you have the skills to get out of that situation and you weren't stuck there.
I could have talked about this statue for literally the full hour if they would have let me. But again, like you never know what's going to resonate with people, it's what's fun is about this book is that it resonates with so many different people for different reasons.
Well, when I was looking over it today before you were coming down, one of the things that resonated to me was the art stealing of the one museum. Yeah, because like I just watched a documentary on... they still don't know who like stole all this art, and there was this big breakdown, and then like it was over, and I was like, wait a minute, they still didn't find out who stole millions of dollars worth of art. Do you want to get into that one for a second?
Yeah. So my husband and I, we love movies like Thomas Crown Affair and Entrapment. Like art heists are, they're so cool, right?
I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was a documentary that was on Netflix.
When you find out, tell me. Yeah. We would like it. There's this art collection or art museum in DC that's a smaller one. It's called the Phillips Collection. I mean, it's DC, so it's a beautiful museum. But in terms of like, comparing it to like it's not part of the Smithsonian. It's the oldest modern art museum in the country. I didn't know that. It's a pretty small, quiet museum. So if you walk in, it's almost set up like this beautiful old home. So it's, hallways. It's very stunning. But years ago, there was an art heist. So basically, the security guard noticed that a man who was accompanied by a woman, he had this big like bunched up something underneath his tweed coat, and he left with this like huge bulge out of his coat, and obviously became very suspicious. So once they left, he notified the individuals of the art museum, and they immediately figured out that he stole this statue called the Virgin of Alsace. It was like a 1920 statue built.
I can't believe he just put it under his coat.
He just put it under his coat. It was worth $35,000, and it was done by this French artist, Antoine Bourdelle. I've learned so many things in this book. So, of course, they're panicking. The next morning, they get a phone call, an anonymous phone call by a woman. It could have been the female companion. They don't know. Telling them the location of this statue. They put it behind a gas station right nearby in a trash bag. And so, of course, the director and the team, they run over, they get the statue totally in great condition in a trash bag with a note, like written on like a legal pad. That's basically like, we're sorry for the inconvenience, but you really need to tighten your security more. So it was like to teach a lesson about their lack of security. And they were like, sorry, like we didn't mean to bother you, but like you need to amp it up. Isn't that crazy?
That's so cool though. But I mean, like, but there's the documentary I saw, and I'll look it up before you leave. That was also the case where it was the security, and then it was like these people who were just used to doing the same routine, and then the security guard was like, let this guy in, and he shouldn't have let him in, and then like the whole heist happened, and then they didn't know if the security was involved or anything like that.
Right.
So then it's so crazy because everyone has done stuff where they're like, dude, you could totally walk out of here with this. No one's going to say anything. And then for somebody to do it at that cost, because like, who the hell's believing that if you get caught? You know what I mean?
Like, put it underneath your coat.
Sure, you were trying to teach them a lesson. Like, you would have went to jail.
It's absurd. It's absurd. I love that they put it in a trash bag behind a gas station.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's so funny. Yeah, there are just so many crazy, fun, quirky stories that I never would have known about ever. I used to go to Phillips Collection all the time.
Yeah.
They do like teacher workshops, and I never knew. Yeah.
What was it like? What's it like for you traveling now and like going out and talking to the Girl Scouts and kind of taking all these different skill sets that you've learned over the years from teaching and, and then you get the book and now you take it on the road and you're talking to people and getting it out there and, networking, because it's not like you just, I'm sure the book is done, but now you have to push the book. Like there's a lot of work after it's done to get it out there, which is actually probably harder than completing the book. So what's it been like for you to do that end of it now? And then I'm sure this is kind of like the feather in the cap of like, oh, okay, I've done everything now. Like I'm an author. Like, what's it feel like to be doing all this?
It's been so much fun. It's a lot of work. Yes. It's a lot of work. We were talking about all the work that you put behind that people don't see behind the scenes, right? They don't see it.
No.
And there's no reason to know that, right? So I thought, okay, writing the book, and don't get me wrong, the book, it's a labor of love. I mean, it takes a long time. But, the book comes out and you're basking in the glory and your book comes out. Well, you do have to promote it and you do have to do things if you want people to buy it and to see it. But I have done so many things that I never would have thought I would have done. So now I'm doing walking tours throughout the city. So basically, being like a little tour guide.
Yeah.
And talk about so let me say, being a teacher lends itself to so many things that I don't even know I realized. When I'm giving presentations, a lot of my presentations have been virtual, of course, right? I've been doing book talks. And a lot of times I'll do like a PowerPoint slides, because people want visuals and images and so forth. It's the organization that is required to be a teacher and putting slides together and so forth. It all translates. It all connects. Doing these walking tours recently, which I never thought I would be leading people around the National Mall or, neighborhoods and talking about, and here on your left. I mean, but you know what? I facilitated field trips for 17 years throughout DC. Not by myself, of course. You have tour guides, you have teams, but you're still leading and so forth. Being a teacher has helped so much.
I'm sure.
There's so many skills involved in public speaking and organization and structure. I led a walking tour recently and it was so fun. And we were near a pond area that there were like all these cute ducks and, adults get distracted too, right? And so people are like looking at the waddling ducks. And I literally had to kind of like put my teacher stern voice on and say, okay, we're going to get started on the next, right? So kind of
yeah. But it's the voice that you have to listen to because you know what I mean? Like you don't want to get in trouble, but then it's funny because it relates on so many levels where like, even you making that voice brought me back to teachers bringing the group back. So it's like all those people went to school. So it's got to be weird to be able to do that to adults with just a voice because they went through it.
and I did it without even noticing I did it. So I did it with a bookstore, a local bookstore. And the woman who does the bookstore events, she afterwards, we were like, having a drink afterwards talking. And she's like, I loved, and she told me, I was like, was I nice? She's like, oh no, you were nice, but I could tell the like authoritative tone that you had because you had done it for so many years as a teacher. So you almost do it you didn't even realize it.
Just to keep things in check, under control.
No, those kind of things have been invaluable. I mean, literally, I credit a lot of my past career, to this, again, with writing, with being able to connect with people. And I think the more you do these events too, and the more you talk about your book, you become more comfortable, much more familiar with your content. But it's been so fun. I never thought I would be leading tours or giving a presentation to Georgetown alumni group, or, sharing. I did a presentation to a guild of tour guides. That was very intimidating when you're like sharing something to tour guides who have been doing this for a lot longer than you have and who know a lot more about history than you ever will know. I was like studying and making sure, I had all my dates correct and all of my people correct because, but I never thought I would be sharing things with tour guides or coming here and doing a podcast in Nazareth where I was born and raised and lived, for 18 years of my life. I mean, it's incredible. So it's given me so many amazing opportunities.
What do you have coming down the pipe next? Are you looking to do another book? Are you looking to expand on this one? Are you going to do more of the tours? What do you have in store?
All of the above. So in terms of this, I have more walking tours coming up. I have more events in the fall because you do have to kind of spread it out. The last 3 months, my book came out in April. It's been very, very busy and it's been really great. But you also want to make sure you don't burn out, right? It's a lot. It's a lot. And so my husband and I are going on vacation soon. We're going away for 2 weeks. I'm not doing any book stuff. But then in the fall, I'm going to amp up again and do more. I have some events, walking tours, some book presentations. So that's fun. And now I have 2 more books in the work with my publisher. And so the one I'm working on right now is a scavenger hunt.
Yes.
Throughout DC. It's so fun. It's a book. So basically, my publisher, they do these series, right? And they just came out recently with a scavenger hunt book in St. Louis because that's where they're based. And that book has been doing really well. They said that it's flying off the shelves because people now, they want to get out and explore. Scavenger hunt. It's a great way to explore your city. It's all walkable. It appeals. And
then is it just something where they have like a destination that you have to find and then they kind of lead you to it through clues and whatnot? Or that's really cool.
It's divided into neighborhoods and every neighborhood has about 20 clues. So I'm writing riddles. So they're 4-line riddles that are basically like 8 to 10 syllables each. I mean, talk about a different kind of writing skill.
Yeah.
Right? They have to be witty. They have to rhyme, but they also they have to be good enough that you can figure it out, but not so easy that they would know right away. And then you take a photo of the spot, but you kind of take it like a blown up photo that, to kind of, and so it's 360 clues altogether.
That's so much fun.
It's so fun. And
I like that it gives you a break from that style of writing to learn a new skill. And then, it'll be interesting to see how the third, fourth, if it's a combination of the 2 different ways you write, making it into one thing that's completely you.
Awesome. Well, you'll love the third book that I'm writing, which will be is all about food.
Yes.
Restaurants and eateries in the DC area.
Yeah.
But not just restaurants. I want to meet people who own the food trucks. And I want to talk to immigrants who, left everything behind and opened up a tiny restaurant from, Honduras and have, a little food stall. So it'll be a nice mix of markets. We have these great food halls in DC. And so that I'm very excited to write that book. I haven't started it yet. So
I'm already excited because I was like,
come down and we'll eat. We'll go to places and we'll eat.
100%. I would love, especially for how long you've been there, and then everything you put into the book. I'm sure you have a very large grasp on the best things to do in DC. Yeah. I can't thank you enough for coming on. How this even turned out, where Torres shared something and then just talking to you on the phone, and I was like, dude, we could do so many podcasts. You are always welcome to come back, promote anything you're doing. Anytime you're in Nazareth, if you're like, yo, Mike, I just want to get on and just talk or whatever, the door is wide open to meet you in the small amount of time I have, and then to learn how you wrote this book. And, we talked beforehand and what you did with your career and where you wanted to go. It is always motivating to talk to more people who are just choosing their passion and what they love over anything else to just be happy and whole in life. And the fact that you get to do that has been one of my favorite things about today. Or, my day was, yesterday was so insane, and I was just so looking forward to this because it's just so impressive when somebody takes a leap. And I know how hard it is to just leave something that is such a routine, and then to be able to just, it's refreshing, and it pushes me to no, you can do the things that you want to do. So, I don't normally do podcasts on Sundays, and this has been one of my favorite podcasts so far. Wow. Anytime you want to come on, please just reach out to me. I want to give you a second to plug the book, where you can find the book, how they can start following you, and just everything about you.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say thank you. This is so much fun. When I got your message on Instagram, I thought, you're in Nazareth? There's a studio production in Nazareth? And of course, and we had plans to come up to Nazareth to see my dad. And I said, oh my God. Like, it was just so...
It worked out very well.
And the fact that you would be so accommodating and meet me and do this on a Sunday morning is...
It's fine.
So appreciative, because I know I'm very grateful to that. And I will come back as often as you would like to have me back.
Anytime you need to promote anything, the door is wide open.
Thank you. I will take you up on that. This was so much fun. So my book is obviously, it's sold at local bookstores in DC, but it's on Amazon, which is, what, love or hate Amazon. It
could be at your door tomorrow.
It could be at your door tomorrow. It's, paperback, but it's also now on Kindle. And the Kindle's a little cheaper than the paperback. So it's kind of, you can get it at Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble carries it. So major places, but mostly I think Amazon's probably the most convenient. In terms of following me, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is Joann Hill is a very popular, common name. My maiden name, Mingary, is a much more, at least, not common. But I'm like Joann_Hill_ DC, because that was as good as I could get. But everything's public and so forth. I have a website, secretdcbook.com, where you can learn more about like the stories that didn't make it into the book, other book events I have. You can buy the book from there, those kind of things. So I'm all over the place. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'll be back.
Yes, 100%. Like I said, I'm excited for the food book, but you can definitely come on as whenever you want to promote any of the new books. It's exciting to see that it's actually still growing, and that, you know what I mean? Yeah. You didn't know how that relationship's going to go, and then now they're like, oh, you'd be a good fit for, and then you're growing with the publishing company.
The
publishing company sounds awesome to begin with as well.
I could not ask for a better publishing company. Anytime and I was very green, right? I would email or call and ask questions that they probably were, in the publishing world were probably very known, but I didn't know. And so they gave me ideas like present to a Girl Scout troop. I mean, they gave me these ideas. I never thought, like, you were a teacher. Use those. You have so many connections, so many skill sets.
It's huge.
That I never before that didn't think about tapping into, and they gave me those ideas. But yeah, I got an email from the owner of the publishing company and said, we're doing this new scavenger hunt series. I really want you to write the DC one. I don't know if you have interest, but we would love you to do it. That was probably the highest compliment I could get.
Yeah, because now now you're like a part of them, and then now they have you as this like DC branch. So they're like, oh, cool, let's throw it to her.
Yeah. It's been great.
It's
cool
to watch.
You never know what's going to happen, right? Like you never know where one thing will lead. I mean, think about all of your projects.
Yeah,
something leads to another thing, leads to another.
Started out as an apparel company out of a bar.
Isn't that amazing?
It's crazy.
It's crazy, but it's so rewarding and
it's
exciting.
why I push everybody to do stuff. I mean, it's the first thing out of my mouth when, and I know it's scary and people, they have sacrifices and things that they have to do, but I mean, I've never been happier. I mean, like I said, I said it to Stress, who was on the music producer. I said, my Mondays aren't Mondays anymore. They're just the next day.
So I own a tutoring company called Capital Teachers, and I own it with one of my best friends. And she would have killed me if I didn't mention her name is Elizabeth Kramer.
You guys can come on and promote that if you want.
Liz Kramer, if you're listening, we're going to come back and promote Capital Teachers.
100%.
But I used to Sunday nights, and I think so many people experience that. And if people are still experiencing that, and I experienced it for almost 20 years, and I understand, the Sunday pits or the Sunday blues. In the last Sunday is just another day.
Yeah.
Right? My dad's like, do you need to leave early today? Because normally I'd be like, we need to get on the road by 1 p.m. I need to be home by 5 p.m. Blah, blah. I said, no, we can leave whenever. Yeah.
It's crazy that, because and I said it last one, it was like, I would kind of, especially in the summer where like the sun's coming down, and then you start knowing the time by not looking at your watch, and then you start dreading getting up, and then it's like, you just immediately start dreading these things that you don't enjoy doing on a Monday. And then it's just like, then it's like, oh, well, what about Friday? And then you're just working to get to Friday. And it's crazy that like once I just did it, and it wasn't an easy decision to just leave a job and do all this stuff, especially with like, everyone's initial reaction to me leaving my job. They were like, what are you doing that for? And then now it's like, I like my depression, all things that like were these big weighing heavy things on my mental. It was almost just like, and I didn't even know it happened, because you would think that it would be like this moment where you're like, oh, and then it's like the one day I was like, I'm not in bad moods anymore.
Yeah, it's so true.
And I was like, I'm not fighting with my parents. And like what you said about like coming home and like being like, oh man. And then it's like, I remember one time my mom being like, hey man, like you don't realize that like you just come home and then for 2 hours you just like dump out to us every day about how horrible your job is. And then at one point they were like, hey, we don't want to hear this when you get home. And then that's when it started clicking. But then I remember I was like walking by the couch over there and I was like, oh. I'm like, I feel freer, feel lighter than it's really different and joy. And it would, believe me, it was not easy work, but to get to where I'm at now, it was so worth. I would have done twice the amount to feel as how I do. It's just being, it's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's so liberating, and then you look forward to each day, and like you said, to live your life and only like looking forward to Friday.
Yeah.
Right? And to like really look forward to like 2.5 days a week.
Yeah.
And really by Sunday at a certain time, you have that dread, right? And so you give yourself 48 hours for the whole week. We were talking about it before the show. Life is too short.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's scary. And you know, and I was very fortunate. I have a very supportive husband and I could do the things that I wanted to do because I was in a position that I could do it. And not everybody can do that, right? And that is hard. But sometimes you just have to be brave and take a chance. And if you don't take a risk, nothing's going to ever happen, right?
No. And that's the best statement to end the show on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you making time to come down here, and I'm going to get through this book, and like I said, I want to talk more down the road about travel, because maybe I'll do my first travel vlog around DC, because it'll be easier to do with somebody who's already on the show, and you know, I want to be taken through cities and create vlogs, and I'm not going to pretend that I have the time or the energy to really get into like cool weird things. Sure. So I mean, anyone who's traveling, this is her book, like you said, you can get it on Amazon, her website. Please go support her. I'm going to wrap up. Anybody who's a first-time listener, first-time watcher, neveragainstudio.com is going to have all of our podcasts, our apparel, everything that you need as a small business. We can help you out. Anything that you see us doing, we can help you out. If you need commercials, you need branding, you need anything at all, web development, I am a one-stop shop for small business, and I can help you out. The other thing that we started doing is we teamed up with Keystone Munitions, and we started Nazo Ammo. Anyone who's looking for ammunition, they can go to nazoammo.com. We have plenty of 9mm. There is a no limit purchase, and we can ship anywhere in PA. If you're out of state, you can pick up, or if you're super local and you just want to talk to me about ammo and stuff, I can meet you in the lobby. So that's nazoammo.com, neveragainstudio.com. Please check out all of her stuff. This is her book. I'm excited to have her on. I'm excited to get into her next book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That